Has the world gone crazy? Life is difficult. When you need help, where do you turn?
Are you willing? Are you willing to let him blow on the coals of your heart? Are you willing? Are you willing to ignite that flame? To let him blow and ignite that flame and set you on fire? And set you on fire to consume this county, to consume this state, to consume this world.
Welcome to Christian Impact, impacting your life with spiritual truth. I am Dr. Kelly Blanton, and I'm sharing practical truths in the Bible that can truly change your life. Today is June 5th, 2024. We continue our series, Kingdom Legacy, and today we are looking at Genesis chapter 38. And with that, let's go ahead and read the text. It says, "It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw that there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And he married her and went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son. She called his name Onan. And she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. He was from Chizib when she bore him. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar." Now we're going to stop right there. We are going to break this up into sections to read it because it's 30 verses, and that would be a little long to read 30 verses in a single podcast at one time and then go back and reference them. So we're going to break this off in chunks. I hope I don't butcher names too bad. It's amazing no matter how much you study and practice, how you can still misread a name. But this is a little known story in Genesis. At this point, most people like to focus on the story of Joseph, and Joseph becomes a main focus. This year, I'm more trailing the bloodline from Adam to Christ. That's more of my focus, I think, going through Genesis this time around, speaking about identity. And like I said, most people want to skip this chapter. It's an unfamiliar chapter. It's got some issues that some people, it bothers them emotionally and culturally, and so they don't want to talk about it. And it's easy to focus on Joseph. But believe it or not, Joseph is actually not the focus of the emphasis of Genesis. It's about the bloodline going from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and from Jacob, the bloodline goes to Judah. Now, you may be saying Judah's the third born. Reuben and Simeon were the first and second borns. But they did things and the Lord took their birthright from them. The Lord said they could not have that. And so that means that the bloodline, the birthright fell to Judah. And so ultimately, everything that happens to Joseph is ultimately about Judah. And that's why this chapter is here. It's about Judah and what goes on with Judah. And so just to catch up what is happening at this point in chapter 37, the brothers have sold their brother Joseph into slavery. So Judah was one of those. And so we pick up and it says, "It came to pass at that time Judah departed his brothers." So we've talked about this. It came to pass. This is sometime later. This is sometime later after Joseph has been sold into slavery, that Judah departs from his brothers. In other words, he's had some type of contention and he has left the family. He no longer wants to associate with them. And we're going to see that later. And he says he visits a certain Adullamite whose name is Hira. Interesting thing about Adullam and the Adullamite, obviously an Adullamite is someone from Adullam, but later on when David is hiding from Saul, he goes and hides in the caves from Adullam, and that's where all of his mighty men gather to him. Now, his mighty men are sort of scoundrels. They're the people that nobody wants. They're the lowlifes and the scumbags and the things like that are attracted to David. And so I share that because Adullam is not an area known for good people. Okay? So Judah has departed his brothers and is headed towards Adullam, a place not filled with good people, where he meets Hira. And from there, he meets a daughter of a Canaanite, and he marries her. Now, again, it's interesting because, Esau married Canaanites. It upset Isaac. And now Jacob and Rebekah are in sort of the same boat. Their son has run off, married some Canaanites, and married a Canaanite. And he has 3 children with her. Onan, and Shelah. Shelah's not necessarily a name. I know most of you would want to name your male sons in a world where everything is driven by men. But the name doesn't have quite the same meaning. And so we're going to talk about name meanings here in just a second. But then he gets a wife for his firstborn, and her name is Tamar. Now let's go back to some of these name meanings. Shua means crying, sorrow. Could also mean shame, humiliation. It's interesting that Judah, whose name means praise, should go somewhere and marry a woman named crying, shame. Is a Hebrew name. It means watchman, so he has his firstborn, he names him watchman. But Onan and Shelah are actually Canaanite names. They weren't even named with Hebrew names. This lets you understand that Judah is attempting to leave his family, because now he's second son and third son. He's not even wanting Jewish names, Hebrew names anymore. He's naming them after Canaanites. And Onan means a pain, a farce, iniquity. And Shelah means unties, undresses. It should also be interesting to know in the scripture where it says he married her. That word for marry her actually means, when it says he took her, it means that there was no ceremony. They just shacked up and had a common law marriage. And again, that shows him wanting to distance himself from his family. Now, Tamar, which is taken for her name can mean palm tree, but it also came to mean royalty because the palm tree was associated with royalty. You see it in decor, both in the royal palace later when they have a king, and also when they build a temple. There's lots of palm trees. And so we're going to keep these things in mind because this is telling us a little bit about Tamar and her character. And by the way, he does this all in Chizib when she starts bearing him child. And Chizib means the place where a man lies in wait. Literally means lying and deceitful. But this was a place that some man had lied in wait and killed someone, and they named the city after it. And so again, it's showing you the character of the land and the place. So we're going to pick back up in verse 6. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and named her Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Verse 8, and Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and marry her. Raise up an heir to your brother. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass that when he went to his brother's wife, that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And this thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore the Lord killed him also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, lest also he die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up to the sheep shearers in Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. We're going to stop right there because there's some things we need to cover in here that may or may not make sense. But Onan, he does evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord kills him. A deeper study in this, in the word meanings, gives the impression that it wasn't that so much that Onan did evil, it was that Onan decided that he wanted to put himself at odds with God. He just wasn't wicked. I mean, yes, he was wicked, but his wickedness wasn't in that he did, I'm going to go out and drink and kill and maim and do. No. His evil was that he decided that he wanted to put himself against God, go against God's plans. He refused to be part of what God wanted. So God killed him. And then Judah tells Onan to go take Tamar and have a baby with her. Now, to you and I, that may sound sort of crazy. Why are you telling the brother to go have sex with the widow of his brother to have a kid? But you have to understand, in this time frame, property rights, inheritance rights, there was a lot of meanings. And although Judah was trying to flee from his family, the belief system that his family held, that was later adopted into the law with Moses, it's called the Mosaic Law. It's actually, God establishes this. There's a principle there that if someone was to die, the closest relative, especially if the widow is young, the closest relative is to take that person as a wife and bear a child so that that child can receive the inheritance of the firstborn. So that the firstborn's family, so that that family could continue. It's not an issue of love and all that stuff. This is an issue of protecting the family and continuing the family lines. And they wanted the closest relative because you are the closest to the person who died. And so, genetically speaking, you were the one that's going to produce the closest offspring that should exist with blood ties. I know this is weird for some of us, but this was sort of the thing. This also brings about the idea of the kinsman redeemer, which is the whole point of the book of Ruth. Ruth being a Moabitess, and she gets redeemed by her kinsman redeemer Boaz, who becomes the great-great-great-grandfather of King David. And so, it's sort of an important thing to understand here, because this is basically what Judah's saying. Your brother didn't have an heir; he needs an heir. And then Onan was evil because he didn't want to produce an heir, because he goes, if I do this, this boy gets everything. You see, Onan, his evil wasn't spilling semen on the ground. I know a lot of people try to do all sorts of crazy sexual teachings off this. That's not the sin. The sin is that Onan wanted his brother's inheritance, and he was willing to destroy an entire family line to get it. Because if there would have been no heir, no family continuance, and that line died off, then the next in line suddenly comes in contact with the inheritance. And that's the evil Onan was doing, is that rather than fulfilling what a brother should do for a brother to continue his brother's family in remembrance of him, he was going to sort of spit on his grave, allow his entire family line to die, his name be forgotten, and he take it all for himself. And that was the evil that God stood against and killed Onan over. Now, when you think about this, we're talking about the lineage of Jesus coming down through Judah. And suddenly, this lineage is in danger because Judah has to have this heir. And so Onan standing up against this from a larger perspective is him trying to stop God in producing the Christ, the Messiah. And so, again, another reason why would God do this? Well, he's trying to stop Jesus. He's trying to stop this birthing process. And I'm going to talk about birthing process because if I was to name this chapter, I'd call it the breach. And it has an identity factor to it. And we're going to talk a little bit about birthing later on, because there's a lot of things that God will give to you and I as promises that really our identities form around. But they have to be birthed. They have to be conceived and birthed and brought forth. And if we don't understand this, we can end up being like an Onan and trying to kill the very process of God, which is actually what we want. But through being deceived, we're trying to kill it, and we put ourselves in opposition with God. And that's not a good place to be in. So then Judah tells Tamar, go home to your father. Go back to your father's house. Let him take care of you. He's afraid that if he gives Tamar to Shelah, that Shelah will die. Now, number one, Shelah's too young. He's just a little boy. He can't marry and bear children. So he's too young to marry. So, but you're seeing something here. Judah doesn't want to do that. He's now afraid he'll lose his last son. And you see this process with Jacob. Jacob really loved Joseph, and it has to do with Rachel. Jacob loved Rachel, and so he wanted his inheritance to go to the firstborn of Rachel. The problem is that his firstborn was Leah, and of course that was Reuben and Simeon and Judah, and so now you can't compare this with Ishmael and Hagar. God did not tell Abraham to take Hagar to make a son. He told him that he was going to provide him an heir through Rachel. And Abraham was disobedient in faith and produced an Ishmael. There's no promise in that. Jacob, on the other hand, wanted Rachel because she was beautiful and came from a rich family. That's why Jacob wanted Rachel. She's beautiful. He was smitten the first time he saw her. He found out she was rich and that she was the daughter of Laban. It met all his qualifications. He didn't ask God who God wanted him to marry. And God's choice was Leah. And we studied that in a previous lesson about Leah's faith. Rachel was the one with the idols, not Leah. And so there was a faith component with Leah that made her beautiful, while Rachel had everything, all the worldly aspects. And so I know I deviate here. I'm just trying to give us better understanding into this. But Judah, he's trying to cling to something that is not showing faith. It's showing a lack of faith and his fear. And so he sends her to her father's house. This is humiliation. Because when she married his son, she's now his daughter. He's responsible. But he doesn't want to be responsible for her. He doesn't want anything to do with her. He's like, get her out of my life. Send her back to her parents. Let her live there. And then he's thinking, I don't want to pay a bride price. I don't want to have to pay for the humiliation. I don't want to pay blah, blah, blah. Therefore, he'll say, no, I'll send for you when he's old enough. So he's trying to skirt all responsibility. He wants to send her away quietly and then forget about her. That's Judah's thing here. He's not dealing with it. He's hoping she'll just go away and be forgotten. And so here you have Tamar, she's like the royal bride because of her name. She's put away, abandoned, and forgotten. Have you ever felt like that? You ever felt like the world has just done you wrong and is just wants to put you away? Or you had a calling on God, you think God has big plans for you, and something happens and all of a sudden you find yourself on like the backside of whatever situation, a town you don't want to be in, a job you don't want, and you feel forgotten. You feel like God's plans and all this vision and dreams is gone. I once heard someone tell me that he graduated high school and he had all these dreams of changing the world, and then he said he went into the world and he realized that none of that was true, and he just had to get a job and make a living and sort of kind of fight for his a way, and you just sort of kind of have to ebb out your little self, and this is just the way it is. And it was really sort of depressing because God hasn't called us to just put ourselves on the side burners and watch the world go by. He has called us to change the world. You and I. That's for another teaching because it's real easy to do. But this is where Tamar finds herself. And so now let's continue because it picks up with another in due season. Verse 12. Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up to the sheep shearers in Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And it was told to Tamar, saying, Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown, and she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot, because she had covered her face. Then he turned to her by way, and said, Please, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. I'm going to stop right there. We'll pick back up in that verse. Some things to explain here. In the process of time. So in the process of time, Judah's wife has died. And Judah is comforted. Now, how did Judah comfort himself in this moment of grief? Well, he's going to get his friend Hira the Adulamite, and they're going to go up and see the sheep shearers at Timnah. Now, again, culturally, we need to understand this. Sheep shearing was a time when the shepherds were bringing their sheep and they shave off all the wool. And they made it a big festival. It was a big party because all this wool they're shaving, they're going to sell and they're going to have lots of money. It's like the harvest time and they're in celebration. And so it is a giant party. And then this isn't any party, it's in Timnah. And so Timnah was a place where Samson later goes and gets drunk and has lots of Canaanite women. Okay, because Samson was not necessarily a good guy. And so this shows you he's going to a party town of pagans where they're going to be partying it up. That's how he's going to comfort himself from his wife's dying. And I'm sure a lot of it had to do with Hira saying, your wife's dead, I'm sorry, let's go party it up. You're a free man now, let's go party it up. And he goes. And Tamar, she hears about this. He's going to Timnah to party. She knows exactly what that means. He's going to go drink and he's going to go have lots of women. That's what Judah's about to do. She knows that. She knows that he should be in mourning. That's not what he should be doing. She has been sent to her father's house in mourning over both the brothers. That means she can't marry. She can't think about things. She has no life, no future. Wear the mourning dress the rest of your life in humiliation in your father's house because your father from your marriage that you should be doesn't want you. And she's been put away and forgotten. It's not right. And so she sees what he's doing and the sin that he's doing, and that now Shelah is old enough and he's not going to give Shelah to her. So she's not going to be able to continue the family line. She's going to be forgotten and that line's going to die. And it's sinful. And Tamar sees this, and so what does she do? Well, she takes off her mourning attire. She dresses herself up. She slaps on a veil, and she goes and she sits along the road on the way to Timnah. Now, the veil she puts on makes her look like a prostitute. She does this on purpose, okay? She doesn't look like a widow or a pure person. She looks like the prostitute on her way to the party or to greet partiers going down. Judah sees her, and he doesn't recognize her because of the veil. And her face is covered, but she recognizes him. And then he's like, wow, you look good. Let me do this. And so we're going to pick up there, verse 16. Then he turned to her by the way and said, please let me come into you. For he did not know that it was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me that you may come into me? And he said, I will send you a goat from the flock. And she said, will you give me a pledge till you send it? Then he said, what pledge shall I give you? So she said, your signet, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand. Then he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived. So she arose and went away and laid aside the veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adulamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. Then he asked the men of that place, saying, where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside? And they said, there is no harlot in this place. So he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Let the men of the place said, there's no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, well, let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed. For I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. And verse 24 says, and it came to pass. We'll come back to verse 24 in a minute. Let's talk about what just happened here. So, he basically says, how much? Let's get this done. And he offers her a young goat from his flock. Now, she sees he doesn't have a young goat. Now, she's not trying to be a prostitute. She's not trying to sell herself. But she understands Judah. Judah promised her Sheila. Judah lied. Now Judah's here. He's offering a goat that he doesn't have. She knows this is a lie as far as she's concerned. You just want to sleep with me for nothing. And by the way, that is her goal. She wants to sleep with him because why? Because if Sheila cannot bear the next one, the next child, Judah is the next closest relative. No, in the story of Ruth, Boaz wasn't the closest relative. There was somebody else. And Boaz went to him and said, well, you want to take the Moabitess? And the guy says, no, I don't want this. And so there's a process. Then Boaz could be next relative, he claims. So if Judah said no to Shelah, then Judah is the next in line. And so, and Tamar knows this. Okay? This is part of the plan. And so she knows he doesn't have money. So she goes, well, you need to give me collateral if I'm going to believe you're going to see me this goat. But she doesn't want the goat. And then he's like, well, what do you want? She says, give me your signet, your cord, and your staff. Now, you have to understand, the signet, that's his crest. That's his sign of inheritance. The cord and the staff, again, they're symbols of his vocation, of his authority, of who he is. So when she asks for these, she's asking for all the proof of his inheritance, his power, and his position. And he gives it to her for a night. This is on the same level as Esau selling his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of porridge. These things are so valuable. The idea that he would squander them on a harlot is offensive to God. I mean, Esau lost everything because of this attitude. And now Judah is displaying the same attitude. And so he goes, okay, and he gives it all to Tamar. And then he sleeps with her, she conceives, and then he goes about his business. But he is honest. He goes back and says, well, we need to send her a goat, but he doesn't want to face her again. Because, he got what he wanted. He doesn't want to see her again. Maybe he feels guilty for what he did. But so he sends his friend Hira. Way to go, Hira. You know, that of the Dulamite. Get me out of trouble, Hira. Take a goat down there and give it to her because I don't want to look at her. So Hira goes and can't find her. And he asks around to all the men and the people. And they say, oh, there is no harlot. So he comes back and Judah, there's no harlot there. And what does Judah say? Is he worried about his signet? No, he could care less. He goes, well, let her keep it so I'm not shamed. It was collateral. She's the one that ran off, so we can keep the goat. He's happy about keeping the goat. He thinks he got the better end of the deal. And now verse 24. And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. And she was brought out. She sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. She said, please determine whose these are, a signet, a cord, and a staff. Now, when Tamar left, she went back to her father, put on her widow's clothes, and played the game. And then 3 months later, now her pregnancy's showing, and word comes to Judah, hey, she's pregnant. She's a harlot. She slept with someone, as if, Judah, like right after his wife died, going down with the harlots himself isn't in this case. The hypocrisy here is just incredible. And so he runs out there and he's like, she should be burned. Forget stoning her, which is what his family would do or what Jewish people would do. He wants to burn her. Let's burn her alive because she's violated us in this way. And she comes out, sets her face towards Judah, and she's like, let's do this. And here, let's get the man who did this to me too, which they would happily have done. And she goes, the man who these belongs, and she produces the signet, the cord, and the staff. she produces, not only proving that Judah is the father, but you have to understand, when Esau sold his birthright to Jacob and Jacob had it, then Jacob becomes the one through everything goes through. And God despises Esau for that. Tamar, by proving that Judah was the father and having it, the blessing, the inheritance, the bloodline, just because Judah gave it to Tamar doesn't mean he sold it because he kept it in the family. He actually gave it to the woman who will have the son with whom this will pass to. In other words, he might have acted carelessly, but because of Tamar's righteousness, she saved the blessing and kept it where it should be. That's why in verse 25 we pick up, it says, and Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her Shelah my son. And he never knew her again. So Judah acknowledges that what she did was something righteous. She wasn't a harlot. She actually did the right thing. She bore a son from the nearest kinsman, that was to be the Redeemer, which fell to him because he refused Shelah. Therefore, it is his responsibility. And she took it from him. And he sold off all of his stuff for this one night stand, which ended up being saved by her and given to the son. That's a very righteous thing. He admits that, but then he says he never knew her again. So even though he did that, he didn't take her as a wife. He didn't continually sleep with her. Let's continue. Verse 27, now it came to pass at that time for giving birth, and behold, twins were in her womb. And so it was when she was giving birth, that one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Then it happened, he drew his hand back in, and the other brother came out unexpectedly. And she said, how did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore they called his name Perez. Afterward the brother came out who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was Zerah. Now, this is interesting because understanding what it says here is that even though Judah never slept with Tamar again, she came back into the home. He treated her like a daughter, and this is where she spent the rest of her life. So no, she didn't ever marry, but she had 2 boys, and she was raised in the house of Judah, and she was brought back into the family. And I will say, even though it doesn't cover this in this chapter, but the next chapter, you find out that Judah returns at some point and reconciles to his brothers. And because of that, when the famine strikes and the brothers go down to Egypt and meet Joseph, and that storyline's for another time, but there's reconciliation there, and it's because of the righteous act of Tamar, it changed something in Judah. But here's Tamar after some time, she gives birth, she's got twins. Wow, where do we see this before? Jacob was a twin of Esau. And the twins are ready to get out, and one of the boys shoves his hand out, and the midwife puts a little scarlet thread on it. Oh, he's first, but then his hand goes back in. Listen, the hand coming out means the baby was breached. The baby is upside down. He's not in the right position. He's not coming out head first. He's coming out, sideways, or whether it's sideways with his arms, like the side of his body, or his legs are down. It's called a breach, and they have to turn the baby. There's ways that you can manipulate and try to turn that baby around so it can be birthed correctly. And when they're trying to do that, the other twin comes out correctly, head first. And the midwife says, how did you break through? This breach is upon you. In other words, what they're saying is that this baby created the breach so that he could be first. In other words, this baby must have turned his brother sideways so that he could be first. So while they were trying to unbreach him, he could come out. He broke through. They called him Perez. And as we know from studying genealogies and things, Perez, the genealogy goes from Judah to Perez, and of course Perez then goes down into the birth line of Jesus. Perez, his name means breakthrough. And Zerah, by the way, his name means rising sun and brightness. Now let me put this together in conclusion here. How can I tie this in with identity? Why is this so important? Well, I think this is incredibly important because, as I mentioned, do you feel like you've been cast off, put to the side, forgotten? Listen, God has a plan, and even though you may feel like you're put to the side, there's still, you're not finished in God's eyes. And we see here that there's really two people at play here, Judah and Tamar. Judah, he got mad and didn't want to fulfill God's plan. He didn't want to be part of the family. He ran away. He's very much like the prodigal son. He ran away. It makes you wonder if maybe Jesus' story of the prodigal son wasn't the fact that Judah ran away and came back. I'm not saying it is. It just makes you wonder if, maybe Jacob didn't run to him. But Judah ran away. And when you do that, when you run from God, you get frustrated and it leads to death. Judah ran away and was worse and he died. And then Onan was bad and he died. And now here comes Sheila, which, by the way, nothing ever really is ever mentioned to Sheila. It's just frustration and death. But Tamar, who was suffering from Judah's rebellion, she lived up to her royal name. She also didn't just roll over and accept the bad circumstances she was in. She reached out and grabbed hold of redemption. Ruth did the same thing. She didn't wait for Boaz to come and court her and date her. She went, found out what she could about Boaz and laid at his feet and said, this is what I want. Tamar said the same thing. They did not sin in doing what they did. What they did in righteousness. Just because we've been abused and forgotten and stepped on doesn't mean it gives us permission to sin. But it does mean that we can continue to act in righteousness, to do the right things. And because she did this, she conceived God's purpose. She conceived God's plans and God's destiny. And in due season, in due time, she birthed forth what God had planned. And that birth was a breakthrough. It was a breach. And so you had a breakthrough that turns into a bright rising sun. So as we identify this, let's not identify with Judah. Let's not run from God, but let's be like a Tamar. Let's rise up and seize God's destinies. Let's birth the plans of God so that we can see a breakthrough and a rising sun. Let's pray. Father, I thank you that you love us, God, that you teach us from your word, God. Help us to rise up and seize the day, God. Not in a humanistic seize the day, God, but in a rise up and seize the destiny that you've promised us, God. Knowing that you will provide for us, God. Knowing that you will break through the plans of the enemy, God, and you will provide a bright and shining future. Lord, we thank you for this in Jesus' name. Lord, we thank you for listening to this podcast. We will be putting out a second one sometime this week to make off for the week we were off on Memorial Day. You can check out other teachings at our website at www.christianimpact.net. And until next time, God bless.